we shift our attention now to the United States and examine how we imagine the nation of America and some of the forms that nationalism in America has taken. In the readings you are doing for this part of the module, the focus will be on how white women have been intimately involved in nation building and nationalist projects, even when the newly formed state did not give them the right to vote. In this lecture, we will look at the gendered figures that represented colonial and newly sovereign America, as well as the role of white women settlers in the nationalist project of Manifest Destiny. And this is in reference to the Amy Kaplan reading. As was the case in India, we can look to the British colonial press for some of the first representations of America. Drawing from some of the earliest representations of the encounter between Europe and the so-called new continents, Amérique, as this figure was called, bore both the stereotypes of the quote-unquote savage native peoples, as well as the symbols of New World exotica that so seduced the Europeans. You can see how distinct Amérique's clothing is from that of the Queen in the illustration on the right. Like the anti-colonial activists in India, those in America also needed to create their own representation as the push for American sovereignty grew stronger. They took the figure of the strong native woman Amérique and added a few more symbols. The rattlesnake, you might recognize from the Don't Tread on Me symbolism, a liberty cap, or a chain with 13 links, standing for the 13 colonies, of course, to make her into a fitting symbol for the rebellious but determined colonists. However, after the American Revolution, Amérique began to change. The neoclassical style we saw in Britannia and Mother India came into fashion, and the figure's draperies started to look more Roman than indigenous. Her skin tone became quite a bit lighter, and the new white Americans now sought to distance themselves from the indigenous people of America, as well as the enslaved African Americans whose labor would be so important in building the new nation. By the end of the 18th century, Amérique had morphed into Columbia, a figure who bore no trace of America's native heritage and derived her name from Christopher Columbus, rather than the land he had colonized. She was dressed in pure white or draped in the American flag, and she displayed the virtues that white Americans sought to claim as their own: liberty, justice, peace, and victory. Can you find the symbols of these various virtues in the two illustrations of Columbia on the right? Like Mother India, Columbia was a mother. In this illustration, she scolds President Lincoln for squandering her white sons for the cause of black freedom from slavery. She was also a beautiful woman who could exhort American men to go to war and protect her and the nation she represented. As we can see, American nationalism was creating an origin story for the nation. At first, this origin story included the native people of the Americas, even if just as symbols of a kind of wild independence and freedom. However, after the Revolutionary War, the imagined community of the American nation no longer included native people. Now they were a threat and an obstacle for the state to conquer. It also explicitly did not include the African peoples who were brought to the shores of the continent by force and made to work the land. They too were identified as both labor to be exploited and an ever-present threat to be managed through state violence. The American nation-state unified to protect an us, white Americans, although poor whites continued to be considered suspect, from a them, native peoples who stewarded the land that white settlers coveted, and black peoples who were being exploited for their labor. You can learn more about Amérique, Columbia, and actually the woman who would come after Lady Liberty. And I'm going to link a really great article that I learned a lot from for this lecture in our YouTube notes. The next phase of American nationalism is one you are certainly familiar with if you went to grade school in the U.S., Manifest Destiny. Manifest Destiny was the idea that the U.S. had a clear national purpose to spread across the continent of North America, carrying those virtues that Americans now understood as uniquely their own: liberty, equality, and democracy. The new territory would provide homes and livelihoods for the rapidly growing white settler population. Manifest Destiny was a distinctly Christian and Protestant vision, and Americans believed that God had a plan for them and this continent. The new narrative of the imagined past started not just in the colonies of Jamestown and Plymouth. They went even further back to Europe, creating mythology of an inevitable march of history westward. This march included the American Revolution, the expansion of the 13 colonies, and the inevitable wars that would take place as settlers came into contact and conflict with the people who had already established societies in the lands that settlers wanted to claim for the American nation. The us, then, were those who counted the early pilgrims and the founders as their ancestors, and those immigrants who eventually found belonging under the racial banner of whiteness. Black Americans were often identified as them, but some did benefit from Western expansion in their own quest for freedom. Native peoples, Mexicans, and eventually the Chinese, Japanese, and Indian immigrants who all helped build the American West were also inevitably considered other. And again, I'm going to link a great article if you want to learn a little bit more about Manifest Destiny. As you will read in the Amy Kaplan excerpt, Manifest Domesticity, women played a very important role in this iteration of American nationalism. If domesticity plays a key role in imagining the nation as home, Kaplan argues, and we are drawing here on our previous discussion of the separate spheres, then women positioned at the center of the home play a major role in defining the contours of the nation and its shifting borders with the nation. In other words, Kaplan shows that the domestic sphere was not only in opposition to the public sphere, but also to the foreign, as in foreign versus domestic. Remember when we first studied the 19th century ideology of separate spheres? We learned that the domestic sphere was the sphere in which religious and cultural norms were passed down. Women were seen as anchors of these kinds of social norms. These norms became even more important as settlers pushed into territory that was viewed as wild and untamed. It was the role of white women to ensure that the men who did the work of conquering did not go wild, but remained anchored to the Anglo-European culture of the American middle class. In The American Woman's Home, written by Catherine and Harriet Beecher in 1869, the authors advocate the establishment of Christian neighborhoods, settled primarily by women, as a way of putting into practice domesticity's potential to Christianize its surroundings and the people in them. And yet, the work of these pioneer women was incredibly hard and their lives uniquely vulnerable to disease and death. The specter of ill health, of encounters with threatening foreigners, and of unruly children captured the anxiety that the project of sending out women to civilize may in fact end up infecting the home and the mother herself with what she sought to tame. Let's listen to a bit of 10,000 Maniacs, Gold Rush Brides. I always loved lead singer Natalie Merchant's ability to capture the humanity of her subjects and help us relate to them even for a moment. Merchant's attention to these women settlers is later balanced in the same album by her attention to the many peoples around the globe that these women helped destroy and colonize in the service of nationalism as well. We will listen to that song, Hateful Hate, a little bit later.
Some of the mothers were giving birth to their babies. 3 babies were born in our company that summer. My cousin Emily gave birth to a son in Utah, 40 miles north of the Great Salt Lake, one morning. But the next morning she traveled on till noon when a stop was made and another child was born, this time Susan Longmire. And we gave the baby the name Alice Nevada.
Story.